freshman year was a blunder year. Everything that could go wrong did, and it left me feeling more lost than I was when I first stepped on this massive campus. Today, I will be sharing with you my unfinished story. My mom was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer the summer before my first year of high school. This was my first big transition from all the movies and TV I'd watched about high school, like Glee and High School Musical. I thought this would be a transformative year. I was finally learning to be on my own. But my mom's diagnosis blindsided me, and suddenly the focus on, oh, my little girl, she's finally growing up, shifted to daily trips to the hospital and nightly panics about whether my mom would make it to the next day. High school became less of a priority to me, and my family became centered on my mom's illness. She often brushed it to the side, despite the days where all she could do was lie in bed and fight the nausea, and eventually this became my norm. Sure, she had cancer, but she was still my mom. She still made me breakfast in the morning, picked me up from school, and scolded me when I was too scantily clad. Despite her cancer, things seemed to find a natural balance, and I thought I could get a start again soon. Then Stanford happened, my second chance at a fresh start. Things were looking okay with my mom, and this was my moment to shine, to finally get that transformation, that independence I have been aiming for. But fate has a funny way of fucking up your plans. A couple days before Frosh move-in, 2014, my dad took my mom, my brother, who also goes here, and me up the coast on a last-minute family vacation. Halfway through our road trip, though, my mom fell ill and had to be admitted to the hospital. Things weren't looking good, but we had already made it most of the way to Stanford, and I still had to go to college. So my dad drove me through the final stretch, and we left my mom behind. I was the last kid to show up to the dorm, and sure, I wanted to meet new people, but it could not have been a worse time. My mom's condition deteriorated, so she had to be transported by ambulance to the Stanford hospital, but yay, at least my parents were around now. The first Monday night of classes, when the freshmen go crazy, I was determined not to think about my shitty situation. I just wanted to be a new Elisa, a normal college kid who could party. I could go on and on about how that night went, but I'll spare you the details. Long story short, I partied way too hard, took like 4 doses of an edible, and ended up being the first transport of the school year. Not a particularly good start for my transformation. At the emergency room, the EMTs were hilariously incompetent at sticking an IV in my arm. The look on my dad's face, coming to the ER from my mom's hospital room a few stories above, well, that was not hilarious. The EMTs eventually handed me off to my dad. No big deal. They may as well have poured gasoline on me and lit me on fire because he was ready to kill me. He carried me up to my mom's room where she lay in her hospital bed with IVs and strange beeping machines, looking at me like I was some kind of pathetic wannabe. My mom was on the verge of death, but she was so angry, she was ready to take me with her. Lying next to her really put things in perspective for me. My mom raised me to respect myself, and I had let her down. Despite the chewing out I was getting, I slept like a baby that night. Maybe all I had wanted was to spend the night with my family, and my subconscious just thought of a really fucked up way to make it happen. I wish I could say things got better after that night, but that I instantly found myself and my family was happy and I made lots of great friends, but that's not what happened. As fall quarter progressed, an overwhelming sense of hopelessness loomed over me. My mom had improved after her hospital stay and was able to go back home to San Diego with my dad, but this spell of health was short-lived. The same problem that plagued her before my move-in returned, and this time, she could no longer eat. Half of me wanted to immerse myself into my freshman year, forget about my worries and my problems back home, but the other half could not muster up the energy to focus on anything besides my dying family. Fall quarter ended uneventfully, and I flew back home wondering if it was worth coming back. Those 3 weeks of winter break were the longest 3 weeks of my life. I watched my mom deteriorate, the strong, resilient woman who refused to believe that anything could take her down, struggling to sit up in bed. I watched countless people pass through the house to say hello to my mom, people who refused to believe that they were really saying goodbye. I watched as walking to the bathroom became too difficult for her, as drinking from a cup of tea became too great of a challenge, as she started to forget the simplest things. I watched my mom slowly disappear before my eyes. My brother and I flew back up to Stanford for winter quarter, him hesitant to leave home, me anxious to get back to school to get my third fresh start. I wanted to be detached from my family. Maybe because denial was my coping mechanism. But I'll never forget the last time I talked to her. A simple Skype call covering 800 miles between us. A call where I did most of the talking, and she just listened, eager to hear about my day. She wasn't really responsive at this point, but she still wanted her family more than anything. At the very end of that call, when my dad decided it was time for her to rest, she grunted out something indiscernible. She repeated it over and over, and eventually it became clear to me what she was saying. Good night. Good night. It was as if a 4-year-old was saying it, but I knew past all of the brain damage she had sustained in the last month of starvation, a part of her was still there, fighting to stay with us. It was the second week of the quarter that my brother and I got a call from my dad. It's time to come home. We went into sprint mode, throwing clothes and whatever we could find into our suitcases, rushing to make it to the airport in time. We sat at the gate anxiously, hoping we could make it home as fast as we could. I was waiting in line for my Jamba Juice when my phone rang. I'm sorry, your mother just passed away. Silence. The airport came to a standstill. The footsteps of people scurrying by faded into oblivion. The blare of jets whistled in the background. For the first time in 4 years, I burst into tears. My brother and I didn't fly back to school that quarter. Instead, half of that time was spent planning the funeral. The other half was spent clearing out the family home. I felt lost in a wave of events. My family falling apart, my home becoming unrecognizable, me, unable to piece together what exactly I was feeling. As I sorted through the eclectic mess that was my mom's closet, I realized a few things. First off, half of this shit was older than I am. Secondly, her style never changed abruptly, just subtly over the decades. There was no sudden transformation moment for my mom. Not even when she was diagnosed with cancer, however much it affected my family. It didn't change her as a person. Every change she went through was gradual. My whole life, I've been searching for that pivotal moment, the moment everything would suddenly click and make sense, but life isn't like that. Anything that I wanted to change, I had to push for, and I couldn't expect to experience some sudden revelation. I grabbed the craziest outfit I could find in that closet, and here I am before you all, wearing that outfit. My mom had raised me to respect myself, and I was ready to live up to that. It was time to intentionally make changes in my own life, to acknowledge my depression, to reach out to my friends, to be closer to my family, to be the change that I wanted to see. I got back to Stanford that spring quarter for my 4th fresh start, and while things haven't been a straight path, I'm finally starting to learn what it means to treat myself. Today, my story is unfinished, but I am standing before you taking my 7,092nd fresh start, and every day is a new promise to a new me. Thank you.